You're listening to the greatest paperback podcast in the world, the granddaddy of them all, the Paperback Warrior Podcast.
All right, welcome back to the Paperback Warrior Podcast. My name is Eric, and I'm here with my broadcast partner, Tom. Paperback Warrior is a vintage fiction discussion and review program talking about paperbacks of the 20th century in the crime, action, adventure, western, and espionage genres. The podcast is an offshoot of our blog. It's located at paperbackwarrior.com, where every day you can find book reviews and features discussing the best fiction ever. Let me bring on Tom, who's going to tell us about what's going on today.
Thanks, Eric. Today's feature is kind of an odd one, but the idea is that several of your and my favorite authors wrote series titles with recurring characters that aren't remembered today for a variety of reasons. I promise this is going to make more sense once I actually give you some examples. My featured review, however, is going to be the Best of Manhunt 2 compilation by Starkhouse that they released last month. What are you reviewing today?
I'm going to be reviewing a 1968 Fawcett Gold Medal paperback called A Great Day for Dying by Jack Dillon. I mentioned a few weeks ago that I got it out of a Baltimore bookseller, so I'm excited to talk about it.
Oh, good. I want to hear all about that. Before we launch into the feature, I got some odds and ends to address, if you will indulge me.
Be my guest.
Okay, first thing I want to do is hype a new book, ebook reprint house that's coming on strong. They call themselves Fiction Hunter Press, and the main dude, John Dishert, is actually a listener to this show. They've been releasing some amazing vintage paperbacks as super cheap ebooks. They're a bit of a shadowy outfit. I don't think they even have a website, but they're active on Facebook, and so you can follow them there using the company name Fiction Hunter Press to learn about their releases. I tried searching for the publisher name on Amazon, and that turns up some of their stuff, but not others. Let me tell you about some of the highlights of their catalog. They've re-released Hunter at Large by Thomas Dewey. It was a 1961 standalone thriller. He's the guy who wrote the Mac and the Pete Schofield series. But this book is about a cop who takes a leave of absence from the forest to hunt down his wife's killer. It's been on my to-read list for a while, and the ebook's going to be the tipping point, and I'll actually get it read. They reprinted a book called Kill Me in Tokyo by Earl Norman. It's another release by them. This is the first book in the 8-book Burns-Banyan series that spanned from 1958 to 1967. Now, Earl Norman is a pseudonym for a guy named Norman Thompson, who actually lived in Japan during the American occupation following World War II. His hero, Burns-Banyan, is a karate-obsessed private eye in Tokyo. I reviewed the book, and it was a real blast if you like karate action. Again, that's Kill Me in Tokyo by Earl Norman, re-released as an ebook by Fiction Hunter Press. They also just announced that they're doing a reprint of The Case of the Lewd Nude by Talmadge Powell. Now, the ad on their Facebook page said it's part of his Ed Rivers series. Those are books that I actually enjoy, but I couldn't find any indication of the book was a title in the series. So I did some digging, and I found out that it's not a novel, but it's a story from Man's Magazine in their September 1963 issue. I bet that no one in America, other than Bob Dice, even remembers that it exists. It's basically a lost installment in the Ed Rivers series that's now available from Fiction Hunter Press. They've been reprinting science fiction titles from authors like Keith Laumer and Clifford D. Simak, as well as some of the John Gore books of pulp titles by Robert Moore Williams and some Frank Kane, Johnny Liddell mysteries. They got a great selection at really fair prices, and they maintain the original cover art for the ebooks, which I always like to see. They also do their releases on the Barnes & Noble Nook format. Oh, wow. For those of you who are still watching your movies on Betamax. Something for everybody. Again, it's Fiction Hunter Press. You should check them out. Next thing, Eric, is you know how much we love to tackle literary mysteries of paperback authorship, right?
Yeah, I mean, we were doing that even before we had a podcast. On the paperbackwarrior.com blog, we do regular unmasking articles that reveal the authors behind these pseudonyms, or odd, scandalous stories about the author's checkered past. Sometimes these unmasking stories are adapted for podcast features. Like the story about the former Catholic priest who wrote the DC Men series, or the time that Milton Ozaki got in trouble for running a mail fraud operation.
Exactly. Well, I've been grappling with the mystery of authorship of this book that I just finished reading today, and I think I solved it right before we recorded this episode. I found it interesting, but it's probably not juicy enough to make a feature for an entire episode. But let me tell you about it, and if it's not interesting, you can just edit this out of the show. Deal?
Sounds good. Yeah, lay it on us.
Okay, so I just finished this book today, moments before you arrived at my house. Called The Billiken Courier by C Lewellen. It was originally a hardcover published by Random House in 1968. Later that year, it was released as a paperback by Popular Library with a very nice pulp-style painted cover. The paperback blurb says it's a novel of deadly espionage of a man whose mind is no longer his own. The hardcover hypes it as a mystery about the dynamite planted in a man's mind. Anyway, just finished the Billiken Courier, and it was pretty good. By the time this episode's released, my review will probably be posted at paperbackwarrior.com, so the listener, will know how much I really liked it when you read that. The main character is a wino, kind of like the main character of a David Goodis book, but this one takes place in San Francisco. He's being followed by a mysterious operative, and it's clear that he's wrapped up in some kind of conspiracy beyond his understanding. Both the paperback and the hardcover kind of spoil a very important plot point. But it seems that the main character's brain is somehow being used as like an external hard drive to store secrets.
Oh, that's wild.
Against his will.
Yeah.
And kind of a different take on the Manchurian Candidate. So as I'm reading this book, I take notes, and these notes kind of become my book review as they get polished. But I had a hell of a time figuring out who this C Lewellen author is. And I checked all my normal traps to see if the guy's a pseudonym, and he appears to be a real guy. The next thing I look for is, has this guy written anything else? And he did. He wrote a Western paperback in 1964 called The Ruthless Gun. This was a paperback original from Fawcett Gold Medal with a very nice painted cover. The tagline of the Western is, "This won't be any ordinary gunfight," the sheriff said. "This is going to be a slaughter, and I'm going to let it happen." It looks great. So when I Google The Ruthless Gun by C Lewellen, I find a reference to it on a blog post written in 2013 by our friend, the best-selling author Lee Goldberg. Now, the blog post was called My 10 Favorite Western Authors by Lee, and it goes through Lee's favorite Western writers, including like Harry Whittington, Elmore Leonard, H.A. DeRosso, Ed Gorman, good authors. Now, the list does not include this mysterious C Lewellen, but when you go down into the contents of that blog entry, and by the way, he gets like 61 comments for his blog entries, which makes me want to put my head in an oven because no one ever gives us that many comments on our blog.
Sometimes they never comment at all on a book.
Whatever. And so there's no justice in the world. So anyway, one of Lee's commenters said, with only a novel, but a masterwork, in my opinion, is C Lewellen with The Ruthless Gun, a novel that all aficionados should read one time in their lives. The commenter said that he has read it 5 times. Another commenter in 2014 said, "During many years, I've tried to find some info about the mysterious C Lewellen, but I totaled a big zero. Perchance, do you know something about him?" Anyway, neither Lee nor his army of commenters ever came to this guy's help. And so it was a mystery back there in 2014 who this guy was.
I'm getting the impression that you probably found out something about it.
Yes. I don't want to toot my own horn, but toot. If that guy had commented on the Paperback Warrior blog and not Lee Goldberg's blog, maybe he would have gotten some finer customer service than he got from Lee.
All right, so you're killing me here. What'd you find?
Okay, so the first clue about the is in the About the Author section of the hardcover of the Billiken Courier. There's lots of clues in it. Let me read it to you. It says, C Lewellen was born in Reading, California. I think that's a misprint because there's a town called Redding, California. And he spent his years, not 30 of them, roaming the world. Now, this tells me, Eric, that as of 1968, this Llewellyn guy was probably still in his 20s when he wrote the Billiken Courier, and he'd be even younger when he wrote the Western novel 4 years earlier.
Yeah.
It says, he worked all sorts of jobs, including being a firefighter. He actually reached Havana in hopes of joining the revolution and spent a month in Alaska sleeping in his car while hunting. Despite all this, he managed a college degree and a hitch of army training. He is now a promotion copywriter, but is beginning to get the itch to take off again. Random House hopes to keep him here until he finishes the book he's now working on. So it's not clear to me based on that if he was working as a promotion copywriter for Random House, who also published his book, but we at least have some geography to go about when identifying the guy.
Right.
So some additional searching on the internet located a possible suspect. There was a university professor years later in the anthropology department of the University of Richmond in Virginia named Ted C. Llewellyn.
Okay.
And he wrote scholarly books about the effects of globalization on third world economies. And I found a bio of the professor online, and it said he received his bachelor's degree from Alaska Methodist University. Now, remember that the author, T.C. Llewellyn, said he slept in his car while job hunting in Alaska. Professor Llewellyn's field of anthropology seems to have taken him to Peru and Nicaragua. And now the author, Llewellyn, said he was a world traveler who traveled to Havana, Cuba. The professor was born in 1940 and died in 2006, which would have made him 24 when The Ruthless Gun was released and 28 when the Billiken Courier was released. So tell me, Eric, you're the quality control guy here. With those two things overlaid and the reputation of Paperback Warrior at stake, would you believe that this 20-something author of the two genre paperbacks in the 1960s is the college professor who wrote books on globalization in the 1980s?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, Ted C. Llewellyn and T.C. Llewellyn are, obviously are very similar, but the Alaska thing is kind of connecting it. You were saying earlier, you said that he was sleeping in his car while hunting, but you're saying here he was...
No, job hunting.
Oh, job hunting. Okay, I thought he was like an outdoors guy. He was hunting. So he was job hunting in Alaska. Then the ages match up, so it's got to be the same guy.
I was pretty much convinced, but not 100%. So I looked on the professor's obituary. Now, remember, he died in 2006. I found the obituary in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and Professor Llewellyn died of a brain tumor at age 66. The obituary confirmed that he was born in Redding, California. So we were right. It's definitely the same guy.
Huh.
In 2003, he retired with his wife to Grand Junction, Colorado, after 25 years of teaching anthropology at the University of Richmond. The obit was funny because it discussed his contribution to academia and his scholarly nonfiction books, and then the obituary just has one sentence that says, he also had 2 novels published, period. No titles, no genres, nothing about it. Yeah, but it's the only reason that you and I have even heard of this guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, he was survived by his wife and his brother, but no mention of any kids. He's also survived by what happens to be 2 darn good novels of genre fiction, from what I know. One of which I just finished, and the other I ordered from the good people at Thrift Books, who will no doubt slap a barcode across the beautiful cover art. So that's all I got on T.C. Llewellyn. You can check out my review of the Billiken Courier at paperbackwarrior.com. So, Eric, ready for the feature?
Let's do it.
Transition music, please. Okay, so our feature today is on hidden series characters. And I think the best way to jump into this topic would be just to walk you through an example. Eric, if I asked you to name every series character that Lawrence Block wrote, how many could you name?
3.
Name them.
It would be, Chip Harrison.
Right.
Matthew Scudder.
Right.
And then the other one is, the thief. What's his name?
Tanner.
Tanner.
Yeah, he also had the Keller books about his, it's like Hitman, Hit List, Hit That, Hit That.
Yeah,
but what if I told you that Lawrence Block had a series character named Ed London?
I'd say tell me more.
All right, so Ed London was the star of a standalone novel that I read called Death Pulls a Double Cross, released by Fawcett Gold Medal in 1961. The book was later republished under the name Coward's Kiss. I read and reviewed the novel Paperback Warrior back in 2018, and I liked the book. However, I had no idea at the time that the book was not, in fact, a standalone, but that Ed London was, in fact, a hidden series character.
Okay.
Now, Block brought back the character of Ed London for 3 novellas that were all published in Man's Magazine and later reprinted in Guy Magazine. The 3 novellas were The Naked and the Deadly, Stag Party Girl, and Twin Call Girls. from 1962, 1963, and 1963. So unless you're our friend Bob Dice down in the Florida Keys, who collects and compiles stories from the men's adventure magazines, you probably would never have an opportunity to enjoy the complete Ed London series by Lawrence Block, but Mr. Block has saved you a lot of trouble. He compiled the 3 Ed London novellas in his short story compilation, One Night Stands and Lost Weekends, published in 2008. It should be said that the Ed London stories aren't some toss-away short works. The 3 novellas in the anthology take up 160 pages of the trade paperback. So these are fairly substantial works of fiction. So I guess that's an example of what I'm talking about when I talk about hidden series characters. And that one, of course, being Lawrence Block. So you get it?
Yeah, do you have any others?
Oh, yeah, I got a bunch. So
okay.
Yeah, so we'll go through a bunch of them, and you can tell me when to stop. You can tap out whenever you want to.
Yeah.
So when I touched on this one a couple months ago, but I know not every listener listens to every episode, so let me do this one quickly. We know that Donald Westlake is famous for his Dortmunder series under his own name, and the Parker series under his Richard Stark name. Now, his hardcore fans are also familiar with his Mitchell Tobin series, written under the pseudonym of Tucker Coe. But very few of his fans are familiar with his series of police procedurals starring NYPD detective Abe Levine. And that's because they played out over a series of 6 different novellas, 4 from Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine between 1959 and 1962, and then a story in Mike Shane Mystery Magazine in 1965, then an original in 1984. All of these Abe Levine stories are compiled in a Westlake paperback called Levine, published by Tor Books in 1985. I got another one. It's kind of a weird example because it's a series that only lasted 2 installments, but it's obscured from view unless you're in the know. So one of my favorite authors, and I think you like him too, is Harry Whittington. In 1956, he wrote a book called Forgive Me, Killer that was published by Fawcett Gold Medal under the title Brute in Brass. Decades later, Black Lizard published it again as Forgive Me, Killer, and you could find it under either title. The book starred Mike Ballard, a crooked vice cop trying to save a guy on death row. You should definitely read this book under either title. It's awesome. More importantly, you should read my review at paperbackwarrior.com because that's a masterpiece. What people don't know is that Harry Whittington brought back Mike Ballard with the intention of making a series character out of him. The second book in the series was called Any Woman He Wanted, but the manuscript was rejected by Fawcett Gold Medal. So Whittington ends up selling Mike Ballard number 2 in 1961, 5 years after the original. He sells it, though, to this low-end paperback publisher called Beacon Books, who publishes it under the pseudonym of Whit Harrison. So we have the first book in the series under Harry Whittington's own name, and the second book starring the same series character under a completely different author name.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So the irony is that as of this writing, the better of the 2 novels, Brute in Brass, is currently out of print. Yet the rejected sequel, Any Woman He Wanted, is available under Harry Whittington's own name as a Starkhouse reprint, packaged as a double with A Night for Screaming.
Yeah, and 280 Steps, a publisher was out from, I think, around 2014. They put out Any Woman He Wanted as well.
No, I think they put out Brute and Brass.
I thought it was reverse.
You may be right. I don't know.
I was checking on it today.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter because 280 Steps went out of business and they took their ebooks down in the grave with them.
They did.
It's crazy that Brute and Brass is out of print now, though. It's a great book, and the Whittington estate is really leaving money on the table by not making it available somewhere. Okay, so what do you think? Do you want another hidden series, or are you getting bored of this?
You've really done some digging here. So yeah, what else you got?
Okay.
What do you want to resurrect now?
Eric, if I asked you to name a series hero from the typewriter of John D. MacDonald, what would you say?
Travis Mcgee.
Yes. Well, there's more. MacDonald had an early series character named Park Faulkner, a wealthy playboy who lived on a private island. He first appeared in a story called Breathe No More, My Lovely in May 1950. It was an issue of Detective Tales. He was very much in the same model as Doc Savage with like a crew of his own. Now, MacDonald only brought Park Faulkner back for one more story called The Lady is a Corpse in the September 1950 issue of Detective Tales. Both Park Faulkner stories are anthologized in the John D. MacDonald short story compilations The Good Old Stuff and More Good Old Stuff. But even before that, MacDonald had another recurring character called Benton Waters in 2 stories that appeared in the Doc Savage Pulp magazine in 1946 and 1947. The stories were Private War and 8 Dozen Agents. I don't know much about either of them, and I don't think they've ever been reprinted. And so I want to thank the Trap of Solid Gold, which is a blog about John D. MacDonald, for filling in the details on those 2 hidden series characters. But I have a friend in Utah named Ben Bolden, I've talked about on the show before, who told me that John D. MacDonald also had a science fiction recurring character named Shane Brent, probably also from the pulp magazines where he sold a lot of stories at the time. With your permission, Eric, I'm going to do 2 more. I'll make it quick.
You're on fire.
Okay. Richard Deming, one of my favorite crime fiction authors. I did a review, we did a feature on him a couple months ago. One of my favorite books by him is called She'll Hate Me Tomorrow from 1963. The hero of that book is a gambler named Clancy Ross. And you can read my review at paperbackwarrior.com. But I feel like an idiot because at the end of my review, I wrote this. I wrote, Clancy the Gambler is a fantastic white knight hero. He's funny, self-deprecating, competent, and capable of extreme violence. I wanted to spend more time with him than the 143-page paperback allowed. Watching him solve problems with a direct and confrontational approach was a real pleasure, and I wish Deming could have figured out a way to bring him back for more adventures. Well, Eric, boy do I feel stupid. It turns out that Clancy the Gambler was, in fact, a hidden series character. He appeared in a series of stories in Manhunt magazine, including Undressed to Kill, Sauce for the Gander, The War, and The Squeeze. Now, some of these stories are actually compiled into the Wildside Press's 2-volume Richard Deming megapacks, where you can get just a ton of Richard Deming stories for 99 cents a piece. So that's a series character that I loved and didn't know that he was a series character at the time. Let me do one more if that's okay.
All right, go.
Okay. So Jonathan Craig, another one of my favorite authors. He's a pseudonym for a guy named Frank Smith. He's best known for his 6th Precinct thrillers of police procedural novels starring Pete Selby and Stan Rader. Well, before that, and even kind of overlapping with it, he wrote another identical police procedure series of short stories and novellas in Manhunt, branded the Police File series. There were 7 novellas and short stories that were published in Manhunt between February 1955 and January 1956 in the Police File series. This hidden series of stories serves as a literary precursor to Craig's Pete Selby and Stan Rader police procedurals. The 77-page novella called Classification Homicide is the only police file story to be converted to paperback as of today, thanks to our friends over at Armchair Fiction. And if you want to read other stories in this hidden series, you're going to have to dig up old copies of Manhunt. So that's all I got in this topic of hidden series characters. Did you have one you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, so I thought of one more example, and I'll quickly share it.
Yeah, share that.
All right, it's about the popular crime noir author Keene. I can't pronounce his real name, so I'm just going to stick with the name he used for his literary career. Now, Keene was a Fawcett Gold Medal standout that authored over 40 paperback novels in the 50s and 60s. All of these are crime fiction and noir, other than a late career Western. But little did I know that he had a recurring character in 2 books. It was a private eye named Johnny Aloha that appeared in 2 of Keene's novels. One was Dead in Bed from 1959. The other was Payola from 1960. These aren't marketed as a series or anything like that. Armchair Fiction has reprinted Dead in Bed, but I'm not sure about Payola. Keene also had a few other recurring characters, but they only appear in his short stories, in Detective Tales and Dime Mystery. Never in his actual paperback novels. I think one of them was called Doc Egg. The publisher Ramble House has started releasing a series collecting all of Keene's short stories. The series is called Keene and the Detective Pulps. I've got volumes 1 and 4, and it's fascinating, and it's a really good read. I'm going to mosey on over to my review this week before we run out of time. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, knock it out.
All right, my review this week is A Great Day for Dying by Jack Dillon. It was published in 1968 by Fawcett Gold Medal. To my knowledge, it's never been reprinted. I've never seen it out anywhere as a reprint or an ebook. I don't know much about Jack Dillon. He did author a 1972 dark fiction novel called The Advertising Man. It tied into his experience working in advertising, which is probably his day job. In A Great Day for Dying, the main character is a guy named Jimmy O'Neill. Now, O'Neill runs a boat that transports illegal guns from San Juan into Cuba. In a former life, O'Neill was working for the mob, and specifically a guy named Red. But he left the profession, but he still maintains a really good friendship with Red. The book's narrative has Red double-crossing the mob to grab $500,000. And it's this really, it's really cool plan. They're going to smuggle heroin through a large shipment of cameras. The idea is to break the camera open, stuff the drugs inside, then crate and ship. But Red needs a boat, and he needs a really fast one, and he needs a guy to operate it because the U.S. Navy's presence is there, and plus he's also got the mob probing into his activities. There's some action throughout. There's a few mob fisticuffs, and of course there's the inevitable shootout on board the boat. O'Neill is sort of this down-on-his-luck guy, just trying to live day-to-day, so he's really easy to like. Despite Red being a bad guy, he's pretty likable as well. I think that's important when an author's focusing mostly all of their attention on criminals. Tom, the writing style was unique. So listen to this. Dylan would write all of the scenes featuring O'Neill in the first person, but the rest of the book is told in third person. Have you ever seen this before?
I do. Do you like it when that happens? I find it jarring.
It made me unbalanced, and I kind of lost a bit in the flow.
Yeah.
But I kind of reeled it in and got used to it after a few chapters.
Even John D. MacDonald did that for a couple novels, I think.
Maybe it's just an odd way to tell a story. But I'm going to have a full review of the book on the blog this month. But overall, really, really liked it. Again, it's A Great Day for Dying by Jack Dillon. And despite it being a 1960s Fawcett Gold Medal, you can still find a lot of affordable copies out there online. I was taking a peek, and it's definitely worth a purchase if you can get your hands on one.
All right, good. Tell us the title and author again.
It's A Great Day for Dying by Jack Dillon.
All right, cool. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. A lot of the hidden series titles we discussed today played out in the pages of Manhunt magazine, so I thought it was only fitting to review the second anthology of stories from Manhunt that was just released by Stark House. It's called The Best of Manhunt 2, edited by Jeff Vorzimmer. In 2019, Stark House Press generated a commercial and critical hit with their release of The Best of Manhunt, an anthology of stories from the legendary 1950s crime fiction digest. Knowing a good thing where they say it, the reprint publishers compiled the second volume, and it came out last month. By way of background, Manhunt began publishing in January 1953, capitalizing on the success of a new breed of hard-boiled authors, with kind of Mickey Spillane leading the pack, supported by muscular authors including Evan Hunter and David Goodis, willing to make 5 cents per word on their stories. While the magazine run stretched into 1967, everyone knows that the publication largely lost its way by the mid-1960s. As such, the new anthology really front-loads the content with stories primarily from the 1950s. Before the stories, the readers treated to a series of essays about Manhunt magazine by Peter Infantino, John L. Breen, and Robert Turner. And then there's like 400 pages of like twisted, violent short fiction. I thought Jeff Vorzimmer, the editor, did a really interesting thing. He actually sought out many deep tracks from the magazine's history and choosing many authors who never really achieved paperback stardom. There's a lot to enjoy in these stories by these guys that I don't really know much about, like John M. Citan, Roy Carroll, and Glenn Cannery. But there are also some of the heavy hitters in there, like Bruno Fisher, Donald Westlake, and Earl Stanley Gardner. It's always difficult to review a anthology, and so I just want to touch on a couple of stories. My favorite story in the entire book, and read this if you do nothing else, is called As I Lay Dead by Fletcher Flora. It's from 1953. He brings the reader this perverse and twisted tale. Cousins Tony and Cindy work each other into a sexual lather while oiling each other's skin on a man-made beach. Meanwhile, their wealthy, fat grandpa floats in the lake nearby, and it occurs to the lusty twins that if something happened to Grandpa, they'd be free and financially set to run away to Acapulco together, where the booze, sun, and screwing never stops. And so there's always a ton of non-graphic sex, in anything Fletcher Flora touches. And As I Lay Dead really amplifies that aspect of his writing. There's murder, there's blackmail, there's double crosses, and it's really a perfect story. Do not skip this story. It's everything that dark crime fiction should be. Fletcher Flora had 160 published short stories in his name, and I can't think this might be one of his better works. Another story I enjoyed is called Shakedown by a guy named Roy Carroll, who was actually a pseudonym for Robert Turner. He started out in the pulp magazines, And it's narrated by a guy who just knocked up a chick at work and has no intention on doing the right things to help out the girl. And he comes up with an idea that she should have sex with their boss and then pin the pregnancy on him and then be set for life as the boss's wife. But as you can imagine, that goes sideways. Another story I liked is called One More Mile to Go by F.J. Smith. I couldn't find anything other about this guy than the fact that he did a lot of work in Alfred Hitchcock anthologies. It's basically a guy trying to hide his wife's body after he kills her, which is kind of a recurring theme in Manhunt. There's a lot of like, where am I going to hide the wife's body? Yeah. I liked a story called The Geniuses by Max Franklin. Now, Max Franklin is a pseudonym of Richard Deming, who's the only author to appear twice in the anthology. One story under his own name, and then this one under Max Franklin's name. It was a bit like the Leopold and Loeb story, where there's two high IQ college kids who decide to commit a murder as an intellectual exercise. And I thought it was really good. There's a really short story. It's only, I think, 2 pages long by Wade Miller called Midnight Caller, which is very simple. It was kind of a woman who's being menaced by a sexually aggressive intruder in her bedroom. It was just sort of a very short little tense story with a fun punchline. The verdict at the end is that this is just another perfect masterpiece of short stories, and so anybody who likes these things should grab them. I love turning to short stories when I just need a palate cleanser between novels. It's going to be an essential part of anyone's hard-boiled library, and I'm hoping that it becomes a monster commercial success for Starkhouse so they can just continue doing more and more volumes in the future. Anything else, Eric, or should we wrap this episode up?
I think we're done. We're just about out of time. So thanks for joining us for another episode of the Paperback Warrior podcast. Again, remember to follow us on Facebook and Twitter to join the conversation, and most importantly, check out paperbackwarrior.com. We've got all the daily reviews of the books we discuss here on the show. On behalf of my broadcast partner, Tom, this is Eric saying we will see you next Monday.
Bye, everybody.